You are standing in a perfectly ordinary line at a local grocery store. There are only 3 people ahead of you, and the cashier is moving at a rhythm that is entirely reasonable. Practically speaking, you will have to wait for perhaps 80 seconds before it is your turn to place your items on the belt. It is a microscopic pocket of empty time. You are not in a rush. The ambient temperature of the room is comfortable, and absolutely nothing urgent is requiring your attention. You are perfectly safe, perfectly sustained, and perfectly still. Yet, in this incredibly brief window of nothingness, something profound occurs. An invisible tension begins to build in your shoulders. A quiet, almost imperceptible drumbeat of restlessness starts to echo in your mind, demanding an immediate resolution to the silence. Our thumbs begin to swipe up, down, in a rhythmic, hypnotic motion. We did not consciously make a decision to check the screen. We did not think to ourselves, I wonder what critical global news has occurred in the last 4 minutes since I last checked. The action was entirely visceral, a pure, unthinking reflex. I have noticed we do this when we are waiting for an elevator. We do this when a traffic light turns red. We do this during a 2-minute commercial break, in the middle of a conversation when our partner walks to the restroom. And perhaps most notably, we do this the literal second our eyes open in the morning, and the final second before they close at night. We have collectively developed an absolute, unyielding intolerance for empty space, rendering us unable to endure a single moment of quiet. On the surface, we often justify this behavior through the lens of efficiency and entertainment. We tell ourselves that we live in a fast-paced, interconnected world, and we are simply maximizing our time. We frame our constant connectivity as a sign of high engagement with life, calling it staying informed or optimizing our downtime. But I often wonder what happens if we are ruthlessly honest with ourselves. This constant reaching prioritizes immediate emotional safety, but the cost is often long-term clarity. When we pull out our devices to eliminate an 80-second pocket of silence, we are not running towards something valuable. We are running away from the sudden, uncomfortable weight of our own unfiltered thoughts. If you find yourself deeply fascinated by the invisible threads that guide our behavior, I invite you to subscribe and join me on this journey of self-discovery as we pull back the curtain on our daily lives. The smartphone has become the ultimate psychological pacifier of our era. It is a digital shield we hold up to protect ourselves from an experience our ancestors considered entirely natural and even sacred, the experience of simply being alone with one's own mind. I want to look closely at the deep-seated psychological mechanisms at play here, not to deliver a shallow lecture on screen time, but to truly understand what we are running from when we refuse to let the screen go dark. Why has boredom, a state that once birthed the greatest philosophies and artistic movements in human history, become an existential threat to our modern nervous systems? What happens when a human brain is systematically stripped of stillness? Let us put down the shield together, just for a moment, and explore the profound, unseen architecture of this modern avoidance. To comprehend why we are so utterly terrified of stillness today, we must first consider what boredom actually is from an evolutionary perspective. For the vast majority of human history, boredom was not an anomaly. It was the baseline of existence. Our ancestors spent hours, days, and weeks in states of relative stillness. They watched fires burn, they sat on porches watching the rain, they walked through forests without an audio stream playing in their ears, and they stared at the stars without a notification flashing across their vision. In terms of human evolution, the brain was explicitly designed to operate within this slow, rhythmic pacing. The brain is an incredibly energy-intensive organ, and because it is so expensive to run, it evolved a highly sophisticated conservation strategy. It requires regular, predictable periods of low-input downtime to sort information, map environments, and restore delicate chemical balances. To regulate our behavior and keep us motivated, the brain utilizes a complex neurotransmitter system, dominated by a molecule that is widely misunderstood today: dopamine. In our current culture, dopamine is frequently described as the pleasure molecule. We casually mention getting a dopamine hit when we eat chocolate, win money, or receive a social validation metric online. But in the realm of neurobiology, dopamine is not the molecule of pleasure, satisfaction, or joy. Dopamine is the molecule of anticipation, motivation, and pursuit. It does not care about the prize we have already won. It only cares about the prize we might win next. It is the chemical evolutionary engine that drove our ancestors to forage for food, look over the next hill for resources, and seek out new tools. It is an internal architecture that thrives completely on novelty, unpredictability, and the quiet expectation of a reward. In the natural world, dopamine was tightly regulated by physical scarcity. If an ancestral human wanted a rush of anticipation, they had to work incredibly hard for it. They had to track an animal for days or engage in complex, sustained social bonding. The biological reward was high, but the frequency of that reward was incredibly low. Between those intense moments lay vast, expansive deserts of absolute boredom. Now, I try to contrast that slow evolutionary design with our digital landscape today. We have taken a brain that was meticulously calibrated for a world of absolute physical scarcity and placed it inside an environment of infinite, immediate digital abundance. Every single application we use is explicitly designed to exploit this evolutionary system, utilizing a psychological mechanism known as a variable reward schedule. It is the exact same mechanism that keeps individuals glued to a casino slot machine. When we pull down on a digital feed to refresh it, our brains experience the exact same neurological anticipation as pulling a lever. We do not know what we are going to get. Will it be something amusing, something distressing, or an angry comment from a stranger? The content itself does not actually matter to the underlying brain chemistry. What matters is the uncertainty of the next piece of information. This constant state of unpredictable novelty floods our synapses at a rate human biology has never experienced before. The consequence is a phenomenon known as receptor downregulation. When our brains are continuously blasted with massive surges of anticipation, they protect themselves by reducing the number of available receptors. We inadvertently build a tolerance. Once our baseline for stimulation has been artificially raised so high, the natural world completely loses its flavor, and an 80-second wait at the grocery store begins to feel like a physical emergency. To truly grasp the magnitude of what we are avoiding, we must look at what happens inside the brain the exact moment the external stimulation stops. For decades, it was assumed that when a human being stopped performing an external task, like reading a map or answering an email, their brain simply went quiet, entering a passive resting state of low activity. But with the advent of advanced brain imaging, researchers discovered something completely counterintuitive. When a person stops focusing on the outside world, their brain activity does not drop. Instead, an entirely different, massive, interconnected network of brain regions suddenly lights up in brilliant unison. Neuroscientists named this system the default mode network. It is essentially the neurological home of the human ego. It is the system that activates when we are doing nothing at all, when we are daydreaming, staring out a window, or lying on our backs looking at the ceiling. When the default mode network turns on, it performs highly complex psychological functions. First, it engages in autobiographical processing. It compiles the story of who we are, looking at our past experiences, connecting them to our present circumstances, and projecting them into the future. It allows us to construct a coherent narrative of our beliefs and our trajectory. Second, it drives our social cognition and empathy. This is the region responsible for mentalization, the ability to think about what other people are thinking, to process complex social dynamics, and to understand the deeper motivations behind human interactions. Finally, it is the quiet engine of creative incubation. When our conscious mind stops forcing a solution to a problem, this network makes nonlinear connections between distant memories and unrelated ideas, which is why our absolute best ideas so often arrive out of nowhere when we are simply taking a shower or taking a walk. But there is a critical catch to this brilliantly designed biological system. The default mode network and the networks we use to focus on external stimulation are mutually exclusive. They sit on a neurological seesaw. When we turn one on, the other immediately turns off. Every time we pull out a device to look at a notification, every time we put on a podcast to fold the laundry, and every time we watch a video while eating dinner, we are forcibly slamming the default mode network shut. We are refusing to let the brain enter its natural processing state. I like to imagine the mind as a busy metropolitan airport. Throughout the day, hundreds of emotional flights land, baggage accumulates, and administrative tasks pile up. In a naturally paced life, the boredom of the late afternoon or the silence of the evening is when the airport closes its gates to incoming traffic. This vital closing of the gates is what allows the internal cleanup crew to organize the terminal, sweep the runways, and prepare for the following day. But by ensuring that we are stimulated every single second of our waking lives, we keep the airport gates wide open continuously. We land new flights of information and new emotional inputs constantly, never once allowing the cleanup crew to work. The result is a profound internal backlog. Months and sometimes years of unprocessed emotions, unexamined anxieties, and unresolved identity questions are left piling up in the baggage claim of our subconscious mind. I suspect the real reason we cannot tolerate boredom is because the exact moment the screen goes dark, the cleanup crew immediately tries to start working. We are secretly terrified of the backlog our own mind will hand to us if we give it a microphone. So we simply land another flight of distraction. I often consider the long-term consequences of this collective psychological choice. What happens to a person, and by extension a society, when we systematically choose perpetual distraction over internal confrontation? The price we pay for the eradication of boredom is not merely a shortened attention span or a temporary lapse in focus. The price is the steady, quiet erosion of our deepest human capacities. One of the most visible casualties is the loss of creative depth. True creativity is deeply intertwined with frustration. It requires a period of intellectual emptiness, where the mind feels uncomfortable enough with the silence that it is forced to invent something new just to fill it. When we look at the greatest works of literature and philosophy, they were almost universally incubated in deep reservoirs of isolation, wandering, and profound stillness. Today, we rarely allow our minds to reach that necessary state of creative desperation. The moment a creative block occurs, or the exact moment we feel a flash of artistic emptiness, we instinctively reach for a distraction to bridge the gap. As a result, our modern cultural output risks becoming profoundly superficial. We see an endless loop of repetition, optimization, and algorithmic recycling. We increasingly consume hyper-stimulating material that requires zero cognitive effort to decode, largely because the environments creating it are too rushed to descend into the deep, dark, uncomfortable waters where true originality lives. This approach prioritizes the immediate comfort of entertainment, but the trade-off is a monoculture devoid of the challenging, transformative ideas that only arise from prolonged periods of wrestling with nothingness. The second major casualty of this perpetual avoidance is a form of radical self-estrangement. If we never spend meaningful time alone with our thoughts without an external input, we run the risk of becoming complete strangers to our own inner landscapes. We might find we have no idea what our authentic values truly are, because our minds are constantly being flooded with the opinions, anxieties, and aesthetics of the media we consume. We slowly lose the ability to distinguish between what we genuinely want out of our fleeting human lives and what our curated digital environments have conditioned us to want. It is a slow, imperceptible drift away from the core of who we are, replaced by an amalgamation of external voices that never stop talking. It is not uncommon for individuals to wake up midlife experiencing a sudden, overwhelming crisis of identity. They look at their chosen careers, their long-term relationships, and their daily routines, wondering how they arrived there, and realizing it does not reflect who they truly are. I believe the answer is often simple, though deeply uncomfortable to admit. They arrived there because they navigated their entire life using an external compass of constant stimulation. They never once dropped anchor to check their internal coordinates in the silence. When we continually avoid the quiet, we avoid the very mechanism that calibrates our life's direction. We trade the deep, sustained knowledge of self for the fleeting, comfortable illusion of being constantly accompanied by the noise. Beyond creativity and self-knowledge, there is a third, perhaps even more critical layer we risk losing when we refuse to be bored: the collapse of emotional resilience and human intimacy. Emotional resilience is not an inherent trait we are simply born with, securely locked away in our DNA. It is a muscle that can only be strengthened through direct exposure to friction. To learn how to process sadness, anxiety, or anger, we must actually allow ourselves to feel those specific states. We must allow those emotional waves to wash over our nervous system, reach their peak, and naturally recede. This physical process is what proves to our biology that we are strong enough to survive the discomfort of being alive. But our current digital environment provides a profound alternative, allowing us to practice emotional bypass at an industrial scale. The exact microsecond a difficult emotion begins to bubble up into our conscious awareness, we apply a digital anesthetic. If we feel a sudden pang of loneliness, we might open an application to get a false sense of proximity to others. If we feel anxious about our lack of control in the physical world, we might buy something online to get a quick rush of agency. If we feel a quiet, undefinable sorrow, we consume hyper-stimulating media to drown out the silence. By constantly bypassing our difficult emotions the moment they arise, our psychological tolerance for any form of internal discomfort shrinks down to almost nothing. We inadvertently cultivate a profound emotional fragility. This cultivated fragility spills over directly into our most important relationships. True human intimacy requires a massive amount of boredom tolerance. It requires sitting with a partner in silence, listening to them talk about the mundane details of their day without checking a screen, and enduring the slow, unglamorous, highly repetitive rhythms of long-term commitment. Real love is rarely a sequence of perfectly curated, high dopamine highlights. It is built in the quiet, unremarkable stretches of time where nothing particularly exciting is happening, but two people are choosing to simply be present with one another. When we lose our capacity for stillness, we quietly lose our capacity for this kind of deep, enduring connection. We lose the patience required to let another human being unfold at their own natural pace. We slowly begin to view the people in our lives through the exact same lens as our digital feeds. If a conversation or a romantic partnership isn't providing immediate, novel, hyper-stimulating gratification, we become immensely restless. We mistake the natural, quiet stability of companionship for a lack of passion. We become easily bored, constantly searching for the next emotional update or the next exciting interpersonal dynamic. This approach prioritizes the immediate thrill of novelty, but the profound trade-off is the inability to construct a foundation strong enough to weather the inevitable storms of life. To reclaim our ability to love deeply and to be loved deeply in return, I believe we have to first reclaim our ability to sit quietly with nothing happening. If we wish to shift this dynamic and reclaim the architecture of our own minds, we have to completely reconstruct our relationship with boredom. We must begin to look at stillness not as a terrible waste of time, but as a vital act of radical self-preservation. In observing modern psychological practices, there is a growing movement toward cultivating mindful stillness. The goal here is not to permanently banish technology or adopt an impossibly austere lifestyle removed from society. The goal is simply to intentionally lower the brain stimulation threshold. We want to allow the nervous system to recalibrate so that the physical, immediate world can become vivid, interesting, and deeply fulfilling once again. This requires the willingness to step into the quiet and stay there. The most effective way I have found to build this biological tolerance is to start with the microscopic spaces of the day that carry zero existential stakes. We can commit to a set of non-negotiable offline pockets. When walking from the car to the entrance of a building, leave the phone deep in the pocket. Look at the sky, notice the people around, and simply breathe the air. When waiting in line at a grocery store, allow yourself to just stand there. Notice the weight of your feet on the ground. Watch the room. When folding the laundry or cleaning the living room, try doing it in absolute silence. Treat the chore as a somatic practice. At first, this will feel intensely aggravating. The brain will demand a screen, and a profound restlessness will arise in the chest. That is simply the chemical withdrawal of receptors adjusting to the quiet. If we can stay with that discomfort for just 90 seconds, a deep, unexpected sense of peace often takes its place. Another approach I often consider is intentionally scheduling a meeting with the internal backlog. Instead of letting unprocessed thoughts ambush us in the middle of the night when we are exhausted and defenseless in bed, we can create a deliberate, structured container for them during the waking hours. What if we sat in a comfortable chair with a blank piece of paper and a pen for just 10 minutes every afternoon? No electronics, no background noise, no distractions. We do not need to attempt formal meditation or force positive thoughts. We simply sit there, and let the airport gates close. Let whatever needs to surface, surface. If a heavy wave of frustration arises, write it down. If a strange, non-linear creative idea pops up, capture it. We give the mind permission to simply unpack the bags. By giving the mind a predictable, daily window to process its massive backlog, we might find that our chronic, baseline tension begins to slowly evaporate, leaving us lighter and more grounded. Finally, we must fiercely protect the sacred transitions of our day. The two most critical psychological transitions are the 30 minutes after we wake up and the 30 minutes before we fall asleep. When we check our devices the literal second we wake up, we are programming the brain to start its day in a reactive, hyper-stimulated state. We let the entire world dictate our internal baseline before we have even had a glass of water. By creating a strict digital boundary around these windows, we allow our days to begin and end in the soft, unmediated territory of genuine human reality. We live in a society that is profoundly terrified of what it means to be quiet. We have built an entire infrastructure based on the premise that more input, more speed, and more connectivity are inherently superior to their opposites. We have optimized our environments for everything except the human soul. But the next time we find ourselves mechanically reaching into our pockets to kill a brief moment of emptiness, I want us to pause. I want us to freeze the hand, look at the glass screen in our palms, and then ask ourselves a very direct, honest question in the silence. What am I avoiding right now? Are we avoiding the quiet realization that a certain path no longer fits who we are? Are we avoiding the deep creative exhaustion of a daily routine that drains our vitality? Are we avoiding the uncomfortable truth that we do not fully know ourselves when the external noise finally stops? Whatever the answer may be, the thing we are running from is not our executioner. It is our guide. The anxiety, the sadness, and the restlessness that rise up when the world gets quiet are not design flaws in our biology. They are the voice of our authentic selves, desperately trying to get our attention through the thick digital smokescreen. They are indicators pointing toward where we need to adapt, where we need to find courage, and where we need to grow. When we refuse to listen to that internal voice, when we drown it out with another endless feed of information, we aren't saving ourselves from discomfort. We are simply postponing our own clarity. It takes an immense amount of courage to be boring in a world that demands we be constantly entertained. It takes a profound level of bravery to choose stillness when everyone around us is running a frantic digital race to nowhere. But it is in that absolute stillness that our lives actually belong to us. It is in the quiet that our true thoughts are formed, our deepest relationships are anchored, and our genuine creativity is found. Do not let an automated feed dictate the plot of your human story. We can choose to put down the shield. We can let the noise fade into the background, sit in the quiet room, take a deep breath, and look around at the slow, beautifully imperfect world that exists right in front of us. I would love to hear your human reflection in the comments below. Which of these trade-offs resonated most deeply with your current stage of life? You are not a data point to be harvested, and you are not a vessel to be filled with endless content. You are a living, beautifully complex human being, and you are allowed to just sit there. Stay simply human.